I'm Ashley, 27, standing in front of my brother David's promotion party venue, my stomach in knots. My hand-designed dress feels like armor against what's coming. Academic achievements hang like trophies in our family, and my college dropout status makes me the black sheep. I've built a design business from nothing, but tonight, surrounded by Harvard degrees and corporate titles, I already feel small. Little did I know my own family would reduce me to tears before dessert was served. Before I share how my own family branded me worthless in public, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and subscribe to hear stories of overcoming family judgment. Growing up in our middle-class neighborhood in Boston, education wasn't just valued, it was the currency of worth in our household. My parents, Richard and Catherine Thompson, cast long intellectual shadows as university professors. My father in economics at Boston University, my mother in literature at Northeastern. They met at a faculty mixer, fell in love over discussions of classic novels and economic theory, and naturally expected their children to follow similar prestigious paths. My brother David was the golden child from day one. 3 points above average on his first standardized test in second grade, and my parents acted like he'd discovered the cure for cancer. Math Olympiads, science fairs, debate team captain David collected academic accolades like other kids collected baseball cards. When he got accepted to Harvard with a partial scholarship, my parents threw a party bigger than any birthday celebration either of us ever had. I remember standing in the corner, 16 years old, watching my father toast to the future Dr. Thompson, while my mother wiped away proud tears. I was the anomaly in our family of intellectuals. Not that I wasn't smart, I just processed information differently. Traditional classrooms felt like prisons to me. While David thrived with textbooks and lectures, I needed to touch, create, and visualize concepts to understand them. My report cards became battlegrounds in our house. Ashley, how could you get a C in algebra when your brother was taking calculus at your age? My mother would sigh, pushing her glasses up her nose as if to see me more clearly, to find some explanation for my academic shortcomings. My father was more direct. You're not applying yourself. The Thompson name means something in academic circles, and you're not living up to your potential. What they couldn't see was how I'd spend hours redesigning my bedroom, understanding spatial relationships intuitively, or how I could walk into any space and immediately envision how to transform it. My sketchbooks filled with furniture designs and color palettes, while David's shelves filled with academic awards. When I dropped out of community college after 2 miserable years, the disappointment in our house was palpable. I might as well have announced I was joining a cult. My father didn't speak to me for 3 weeks. "What exactly do you plan to do with your life?" he finally asked over dinner one night. Fork suspended midair. Genuine bewilderment in his eyes. "I'm going to start my own interior design business," I answered, trying to sound more confident than I felt. My mother exchanged glances with my father. "Honey, that's not a real career path without proper credentials. Perhaps try the design program at Northeastern? I could speak to some colleagues." "I learn by doing," I insisted. "Not everyone needs a classroom to succeed." David, home from Harvard for the weekend, patted my hand condescendingly. "Just be prepared for how competitive creative fields are. Without proper networking and credentials." "I've already lined up my first client," I interrupted, though it was only my friend Madison's studio apartment. "I'm going to build my portfolio through actual work." 5 years later, Ashley Thompson Designs was a legitimate business. Not empire status, but I had regular clients, a growing portfolio, and had recently hired a part-time assistant. I'd converted a small warehouse space into a charming studio in a gentrifying area of Boston. I was making enough to afford my own apartment and even put some aside each month. Not that my family acknowledged any of it as legitimate success. "And how's your little decorating hobby going?" was my Aunt Rebecca's standard greeting at family gatherings. "Do you have health insurance yet?" was my mother's. Meanwhile, David completed his MBA, landed a job at Mercer Consulting, and began his rapid ascent up the corporate ladder. Each promotion, each salary increase became family legend. When he bought his first condo in one of Boston's most exclusive neighborhoods, My parents framed the real estate listing on their wall right next to his Harvard diploma. Our relationship wasn't awful. David and I still texted occasionally, sent birthday gifts, and maintained the superficial connection of siblings raised in the same household. But the easy camaraderie of our early childhood had evaporated under the heat of parental comparison and diverging life paths. When the invitation arrived for David's promotion celebration, he was being named the youngest vice president in his company's history. I almost threw it away. The embossed cardstock felt heavy with unspoken judgment. The event would be held at Sorellina, one of Boston's most upscale Italian restaurants, where the napkins probably cost more than my daily earnings. I RSVP'd yes anyway. Part of me still craved my family's approval, still hoped that maybe this time they'd see me, really see me, and recognize that I was building something meaningful in my own way. Plus, I reasoned, it would be good networking. Rich people needed interior designers too, right? I had no idea I was walking straight into my own public humiliation. My apartment reflected exactly who I was, a testament to my design philosophy of finding beauty in the unconventional. Located in South End, it wasn't the prestigious Back Bay address that David boasted, but what it lacked in zip code status, it made up for in character. Exposed brick walls complemented the reclaimed wood shelving I'd installed myself. My furniture was an eclectic mix of vintage market finds I'd restored and contemporary pieces I'd saved for months to purchase. A bold blue velvet sofa, my biggest splurge, anchored the living room beneath a gallery wall of local artists' work and my own photography. In the week leading up to David's promotion party, this sanctuary became my war room. "You absolutely have to go," Madison insisted, sprawled across my blue sofa, wineglass in hand. As my best friend since high school and my first ever client, she knew all the sordid details of my family dynamics. Show up looking fabulous, be charming as hell, and remind them you exist outside their narrow definition of success. "Easy for you to say," I replied, refilling my glass. "Your parents framed your art school acceptance letter." Madison flipped her red hair over her shoulder. "True, but I've met your family enough times to know what you're up against. The Thompsons make the British royal family look emotionally available." She wasn't wrong. Since starting my business, I'd seen my parents exactly 11 times, usually on holidays, and the occasional obligatory Sunday dinner. Each visit featured the same subtle digs about when you might go back to school or forwarded emails about design certificate programs that would give me actual credentials. The day before the party, Madison accompanied me to Newbury Street to find the perfect outfit, something that screamed successful businesswoman, but didn't try too hard. "What about this?" She held up a sleek black pantsuit. "Too corporate. I'd look like I'm playing dress-up in David's world." We finally settled on a midnight blue cocktail dress with an architectural neckline that showcased my collarbone and a hemline that hit just below the knee, conservative enough for my parents, but with enough edge to feel authentic to my aesthetic. The morning of the party, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, applying makeup with uncharacteristic precision. My hands trembled slightly as I lined my eyes. "You are a successful small business owner," I told my reflection. "Your work is featured in Boston Home Magazine. Clients seek you out specifically. Your worth isn't determined by degrees on a wall." But the pep talk rang hollow against memories of past family gatherings. Last Christmas, my father had introduced David to his colleagues as my son, the Harvard MBA and me as my daughter, who's very creative. The distinction stung like antiseptic on an open wound. I'd wrapped David's gift the night before a vintage Art Deco paperweight I'd found at an estate sale, knowing his office aesthetic leaned towards sophisticated masculine lines. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd spent hours finding the perfect gift for someone who probably thought my career was a joke. My phone chimed with a text from Madison. "Remember, you're a badass. Don't let them Thompson you down." I smiled weakly at our inside joke. Thompson you down had become our shorthand for family-induced feelings of inadequacy. The Uber pulled up outside my apartment at 6:30 p.m. As we drove toward the upscale Italian restaurant, anxiety pooled in my stomach like lead. The driver tried making small talk, but I could only manage monosyllabic responses, mentally rehearsing conversation topics that might impress my family. New client acquisitions? They'd ask about revenue. Recent design project? They'd ask about square footage costs. Industry trends? They'd question my expertise without credentials. Halfway there, I seriously considered asking the driver to turn around. I could text David with a last-minute excuse: food poisoning, client emergency, sudden onset plague. My phone buzzed again. Madison, don't you dare chicken out. I'm psychically sensing your escape plans. How did she always know? Madison, text me updates from the bathroom if needed. You've got this. The Uber pulled up to Soralina's gleaming entrance. Through the windows, I could see elegant lighting, white tablecloths, and Boston's elite dining in sophisticated comfort. The host greeted me with practiced warmth as I gave David's name for the reservation. Ah, yes. The Thompson celebration. They're in our private dining room. May I take your coat? I surrendered my vintage trench and clutched my small purse like a shield. Immediately, I spotted my mother's cousin Jennifer, who taught at MIT and had never approved of my career choice. Ashley, what a surprise! We didn't think you'd make it, she said, air kissing near my cheek. Her eyes performed a quick assessment of my outfit, lingering slightly too long on my statement earrings handmade by a local artist friend. I wouldn't miss David's big night, I replied with forced brightness. Such a remarkable achievement at his age, she continued. Your parents must be beside themselves with pride. They certainly are. And how's your decorating business? And there it was, the first subtle dig of the evening, reducing my design work to mere decoration. I plastered on a smile that felt like it might crack my face. My interior design firm is doing well. Thanks for asking. I've recently expanded into commercial spaces. How lovely, she said, already looking over my shoulder for more interesting conversation partners. You always did like to arrange your dollhouse furniture as a child. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. This was going to be a very long night. Soralina's private dining room exuded understated luxury. Crystal chandeliers cast a flattering glow over the 30 or so guests mingling before dinner. White orchids and hydrangeas adorned each table, and waitstaff circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. My parents stood near the center of the room, my father's silver hair and imposing height making him easy to spot. My mother wore her signature pearl necklace and a navy blue dress that likely cost more than my rent. They were speaking with an older man in an expensive suit, probably someone important from David's firm. I grabbed a champagne flute from a passing server and took a fortifying sip before approaching. Mom, Dad, I said, leaning in to kiss my mother's cheek. She smelled of Chanel No. 5, the same perfume she'd worn my entire life. Ashley, you made it, my mother said with mild surprise. Her eyes performed the same assessment cousin Jennifer's had, though more thoroughly. That's an interesting dress. From my mother, interesting was rarely a compliment. Thank you. How are you both? My father gave me a distracted half-hug. We're excellent. Have you met Walter Jameson? He's the CEO of Mercer Consulting. Not yet. I extended my hand to the distinguished man. Ashley Thompson. Congratulations on acquiring such excellent talent in my brother. Walter shook my hand firmly. David speaks very highly of the firm. Your son has a remarkable mind for strategy, Richard. He takes after his mother, my father said proudly. She's published 3 books on literary analysis frameworks that are quite revolutionary in approach. The conversation continued about David's accomplishments, my mother's recent academic conference keynote, and my father's department chairmanship. No one asked what I'd been doing, and I didn't volunteer the information. After a few minutes, Walter was pulled away by another guest, and my parents' attention immediately shifted. David just arrived with Rebecca, my mother said, gesturing toward the entrance, where my brother and his girlfriend were greeting guests. We should go welcome them. They moved away without another word to me, leaving me alone with my champagne. I spotted my Aunt Rebecca, my mother's sister and fellow academic, by the bar. She waved me over with exaggerated enthusiasm. There's my artistic niece, she declared loudly enough for nearby guests to turn. Still decorating people's living rooms? I suppressed a sigh. Interior design is about creating functional spaces that enhance people's lives. Aunt Rebecca. It's architecture, meets psychology, meets art. Of course, dear. Very creative. She patted my arm. So tell me about this little business of yours. Are you making ends meet? Your mother worries. I'm doing well, actually. I recently hired an assistant, and I'm working on a boutique hotel project in Cambridge. An assistant? How grown up. She sipped her martini. Though I always thought you'd eventually go back to school. Your IQ tests as a child were quite promising, you know. Not Kite David's level, but still. Ashley. My brother's voice saved me from hearing exactly how my intelligence compared to his. David approached with his arm around his girlfriend, Rebecca, a corporate lawyer with perfect posture and a Harvard Law degree. Congratulations, VP, I said, giving him a genuine hug. Despite everything, I did love my brother. This is huge. Thanks for coming, he said, looking somewhat surprised to see me. You remember Rebecca? Of course, I smiled at his girlfriend. How's corporate law treating you? Busy but rewarding. I just made junior partner, she replied. That's fantastic. And you're still doing the design thing? She asked. The design thing. My career reduced to a thing. Yes, my firm is growing steadily. David jumped in. Ashley's always had a good eye for colors and stuff. Remember how she used to rearrange the furniture in our house growing up? Mom would come home and find the living room completely different because the original layout blocked natural light and created awkward conversation groupings, I explained. They both laughed as if I'd made a joke. Come meet some of my colleagues, David said, guiding me toward a group of polished professionals by the windows. The next hour passed in a blur of introductions and small talk. David's co-workers were perfectly polite but clearly confused by my presence. So you're David's sister? A man named James asked, his tone suggesting he'd expected someone more like David. Yes, though we took different career paths. Ashley didn't go the traditional route, David explained. As if translating a foreign concept, she's more hands-on. I clenched my jaw. I'm an interior designer with my own firm. Fascinating, said a woman whose name I'd already forgotten. My cousin's wife does some decorating on the side. Maybe you know her? Jennifer Lawrence? Different industry, I muttered. Dinner was announced, saving me from explaining that interior design was not, in fact, a hobby one did on the side like scrapbooking or fantasy football. I found my assigned seat noticeably far from my parents and brother at the head table. Instead, I was seated with distant family members and a few of David's colleagues who didn't warrant premium placement. I hear you're some kind of artist, said the middle-aged man seated beside me as we unfolded our napkins. Interior designer, actually. I own Ashley Thompson Designs. Interesting. Na design degree? I'm self-taught with supplemental professional certification courses, I lied, already tired of defending myself. Brave. Most creative fields require substantial credentials these days, he remarked, buttering his bread. My daughter is at RISD, very competitive program. As the salad course was served, I noticed my parents engaged in animated conversation with David's boss across the table. My mother's laugh carried across the room, the special one she reserved for important people. I'd heard it maybe twice directed at me in my entire life. Youngest VP in company history, I overheard as a server refilled water glasses. His analytical approach to the Singapore merger was absolutely brilliant. I pushed arugula around my plate, appetite fading. And where did you attend university? Asked the woman seated across from me, wife of some executive or another. I started at Boston Community College but found traditional education wasn't the right path for me, I replied with practiced casualness. Oh, her eyebrows rose slightly. How unusual in your family. I could practically see the computation happening behind her eyes. Parents are professors. Brother is Harvard MBA. Sister is nothing. I believe education takes many forms, I said, reaching for my wineglass. Of course, she nodded politely, but her expression had already shifted from interest to dismissal. She turned to speak with the person on her other side. The main course arrived something extravagant with truffle sauce that I could barely taste. Across the room, I saw David's boss asking him questions, nodding approvingly at his answers. My parents beamed with pride. No one at my table spoke to me, unless absolutely necessary. During a lull between courses, I noticed someone new had taken interest in me, an older man, with kind eyes, who introduced himself as Edward Bennett, head of marketing for Mercer Consulting. "David mentioned you're a designer," he said, unexpectedly joining the empty chair next to me. "What type of projects do you typically handle?" Surprised by genuine interest, I straightened. "Primarily residential and small commercial spaces. I recently completed a farm-to-table restaurant in Somerville and a tech startup office in Cambridge." Impressive. My sister used a designer for her new dental practice and said it transformed the patient experience. The psychology of space is fascinating. For the first time all evening, I felt a flicker of confidence. Exactly. Environmental psychology plays a huge role in how people interact with spaces. For the tech office, I specifically designed collaboration areas that encourage spontaneous idea sharing while still providing focused work zones. I pulled out my phone to show him photos of the project, animated as I explained my design choices. "Your passion really shows through your work," Edward remarked, genuinely examining the photos. "Thank you," I smiled, warmth spreading through my chest at being seen, really seen, for my work. The moment was shattered by my mother's voice from the head table. "Edward, come tell Walter about that marketing campaign from last quarter. He was just asking about digital conversion rates." Edward excused himself with an apologetic smile, and I was once again alone in a room full of people celebrating my brother's success, a success defined entirely by standards I could never meet. The dessert course arrived delicate tiramisu in individual glass cups with gold-dusted chocolate decorations. As servers distributed coffee and dessert wines, my father stood and tapped his spoon against his water glass. The room fell silent. "Thank you all for joining us to celebrate David's remarkable achievement," he began, his professor's voice carrying effortlessly through the space. "As some of you know, the Thompson name has long been associated with academic excellence. Catherine and I have dedicated our lives to the pursuit and sharing of knowledge." My stomach tightened. I knew where this was heading. David has continued that tradition magnificently. From his earliest years, we knew he was destined for greatness. National Merit Scholar, Harvard undergraduate with honors, Harvard MBA, and now, at just 32, the youngest vice president in Mercer Consulting's 70-year history. Applause rippled through the room. My brother smiled modestly, though I could see the pride shining in his eyes. "As educators, Catherine and I always emphasize the importance of applying oneself fully to intellectual pursuits," my father continued. "The discipline of rigorous academic training prepares one for excellence in all aspects of life." David's journey exemplifies what happens when one makes the right choices and follows the proven path to success. I took a large sip of dessert wine, wishing it were something stronger. My mother stood next to my father, placing her hand on his arm. "We're so proud of the man David has become," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "His commitment to excellence, his work ethic, and his brilliant mind have taken him exactly where we always knew he would go." More applause. David's girlfriend squeezed his hand adoringly. "I'd like to add," my mother continued, "that education has been the foundation of David's success. In today's world, proper credentials and training are essential." David understood this from an early age and never wavered from pursuing the highest levels of academic achievement possible. My cheeks burned. Every word felt like a direct indictment of my choices. I stared intently at my dessert, pushing the mascarpone cream around with my spoon. David stood up next, accepting a champagne flute from a server. "Thank you, Mom and Dad, for always pushing me to be my best," he said, raising his glass toward them. "Your emphasis on education and hard work gave me the foundation I needed. Not everyone finds their path so clearly or makes the choices that lead to conventional success." His eyes flickered briefly to me before continuing. "I'm fortunate to have discovered my strengths early and pursued them through the right channels. The structured approach to problem solving I learned at Harvard has been invaluable in my career. Was it my imagination, or was everyone looking at me now? I took another sip of wine to hide my discomfort. My Uncle James, my father's brother, and a dean at MIT, spoke up next. To David, proof that the traditional path of excellence still yields the best results in today's world. He raised his glass. Not everyone can be successful the traditional way, but those who are deserve our highest admiration. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. I felt increasingly like an exhibit in a museum of failure. Some people just aren't cut out for rigorous academic work, added my cousin Stephanie loudly from a nearby table. She turned directly to me. Ashley, do you ever regret not applying yourself more in school? It must be difficult watching David's success knowing you could have had similar opportunities. The table fell silent. All eyes turned to me. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Well, my father said, filling the awkward silence, different people have different capabilities. At least one of our children understood the value of education and the importance of academic credentials in today's competitive world. The comment landed like a physical blow. I heard a few uncomfortable coughs and saw several guests exchange glances. David laughed nervously, but said nothing in my defense. His silence hurt almost as much as my father's words. I felt tears welling up as the room continued to stare at me, the family disappointment, the cautionary tale, the failure. Excuse me, I managed to whisper, placing my napkin beside my barely touched tiramisu and standing on shaky legs. Restroom. I walked as steadily as possible across the dining room, feeling the weight of judgmental gazes on my back. The moment the bathroom door closed behind me, the tears I'd been holding back all night began to fall. The elegant bathroom at Sorellina matched the restaurant's refined aesthetic, marble countertops, individual cloth hand towels, and soft lighting designed to flatter. I locked myself in the furthest stall, sank onto the closed toilet lid, and let the tears flow freely. My phone buzzed in my clutch. Madison, as if psychically connected to my emotional state. Madison. Status update? Survival level? My fingers trembled as I typed. Disaster. Public humiliation. Dad basically called me the family failure. Direct quote, at least one of our children understood the value of education. Madison. Those pretentious academic assholes. Want me to call with a fake emergency? The offer was tempting. I could escape, flee back to my apartment, and lick my wounds in private. But something inside me rebelled at the thought of giving them the satisfaction. Madison, you are worth 10 of them. Your work is amazing. They're just too small-minded to see different forms of intelligence and success. I stared at her words through my tears, wanting desperately to believe them. But decades of parental disappointment had left deep grooves of inadequacy in my psyche. As I sat in the bathroom stall, memories flooded back, painful reminders of how my different learning style had been misinterpreted as laziness or lack of intelligence throughout my childhood. Me at 8 years old, struggling with multiplication tables while David breezed through them. You're just not focusing, Ashley. If you applied yourself like your brother, at 12, bringing home an art project that had won school recognition. That's nice, dear. But how are your math grades coming along? At 17, my father discovering I'd been helping a classmate redesign her bedroom instead of studying for SATs. This frivolous decorating obsession is going to ruin your future. Is this really how you want to waste your potential? The message had always been clear. Academic achievement was the only achievement that mattered. My creative talents were cute hobbies at best, character flaws at worst. For a moment, I allowed myself to wonder, what if they were right? What if I had pushed harder, forced myself to fit into the traditional academic mold? Would I be the one receiving accolades tonight instead of hiding in a bathroom? I pulled up the website for my design business on my phone, scrolling through project photos. The restaurant with the custom lighting installation that had been featured in Boston Magazine. The young tech entrepreneur's home that perfectly balanced minimalism with warmth. The struggling bookstore I'd redesigned pro bono that had subsequently seen a 40% increase in customer dwell time and sales. This was real work. Valuable work. work that required intelligence, creativity, business acumen, and psychological insight, just not the kind that came with framed diplomas. I thought about my business struggles and successes. The lean first year when I'd eaten ramen for weeks to afford business cards and a basic website. The first client who wasn't a friend or family connection. The first five-figure project. Hiring Zoe, my part-time assistant, 3 months ago, a step toward building something bigger than myself. What did success really mean, anyway? Was it the external validation my family so desperately craved? Or was it waking up every morning excited about your work, making a tangible difference in people's environments, being true to your unique talents? I wiped my tears with toilet paper and blew my nose. My makeup was beyond salvation, mascara streaked down my cheeks, foundation blotchy from tears. I looked like a watercolor painting left in the rain. The bathroom door opened, and I heard heels clicking on marble. "Ashley, are you in here?" It was Rebecca, David's girlfriend. I remained silent, not ready to face anyone. "Your mother sent me to check on you." Her tone suggested she'd been given an unwanted errand. Everyone's about to make the final toast. Of course. Heaven forbid the Thompson family celebration be marred by my conspicuous absence. It might force them to acknowledge the cruel public humiliation they'd just inflicted. "Tell them I'll be out in a minute," I managed, my voice surprisingly steady. More heel clicks, the door opening and closing, alone again. I stared at my reflection in my phone's camera, at my tear-stained face and red eyes. I had two choices: slink back to the table with my tail between my legs, reinforcing my status as family disappointment, or something shifted inside me. A lifetime of swallowing insults, of shrinking myself to avoid judgment, of seeking approval, that would never come at all, suddenly felt exhausting and pointless. I stood up and unlocked the stall. At the marble sink, I splashed cold water on my face, washing away the ruined makeup. Without cosmetics, I looked younger, more vulnerable, but also more authentic. I straightened my shoulders, looking directly into the mirror. "Your worth isn't determined by their narrow definition of success," I told my reflection. "You've built something real, something meaningful, entirely on your own terms." I reapplied lipstick, the only makeup salvageable from my evening clutch, and ran my fingers through my hair. It was time to return to the party, but not as the ashamed family disappointment. For the first time in my life, I was going to stand up for myself, and my choices, consequences, be damned. When I returned to the private dining room, the final toast was just beginning. Dessert plates had been cleared, and servers were topping off champagne glasses. I slipped back into my seat quietly, noticing a few curious glances at my now bare face. David was standing again, champagne flute raised. "Thank you all for sharing this special evening. I'm deeply grateful for the opportunities Mercer Consulting has provided and for the unwavering support of my family." Polite applause followed as everyone sipped their champagne. Conversation resumed around the tables as servers brought out petite fours and additional coffee. At my table, people studiously avoided eye contact with me, creating the uncomfortable bubble that often surrounds those who've been publicly humiliated. I reached for my champagne, taking a deliberate sip while gathering my courage. The cold liquid burned my throat, but it also provided the final push I needed. "I'd like to say something," I announced to my table, my voice stronger than I expected. Heads turned in surprise. "I think we're all finished with the formal speeches," said my aunt's husband nervously. "I'm not making a speech," I clarified, standing up. "I'm addressing the elephant in the room." The surrounding conversations quieted as people noticed me standing. I saw my mother's eyes widen in alarm from the head table. "First, congratulations again to David. Your success is well deserved," I said, voice projecting across the now silent room. "But I feel compelled to address what just happened here." My father started to stand, but my mother placed a restraining hand on his arm. For those who missed it, my father just publicly stated that only one of his children, David, understood the value of education. This was after a series of thinly veiled comments from various family members about my lack of academic credentials and implied lack of success. I could see uncomfortable shifting in seats around the room. David looked mortified. I've spent my entire life being compared to my academically gifted brother and being found wanting because my intelligence doesn't fit neatly into standardized tests and lecture halls. And you know what? I'm done apologizing for that. I pulled my phone from my clutch, holding it up. This is my most recent project, a farm-to-table restaurant in Somerville that was just featured in Boston Magazine's Design Spotlight. I designed every aspect of the space to enhance the dining experience while highlighting the restaurant's commitment to sustainable practices. The owner reported a 30% increase in positive reviews, specifically mentioning the atmosphere. I swiped to another image. This is the office space I designed for Tech Future, a startup that just secured $8 million in venture capital funding. Their CEO specifically credited the collaborative environment I created as a factor in their team's innovation process. My voice grew stronger with each word. What none of you know, because none of you have asked, is that I recently signed a contract with Beacon Hill Boutique Hotels to design their new property opening next spring. It's the largest project my firm has ever undertaken, and I beat out 3 other established design firms with fancy degrees to get it. I looked directly at my parents now. I may not have Harvard credentials framed on my wall, but I've built a successful business from nothing. No connections, no financial support, no prestigious alumni network, just hard work, talent, and perseverance. The room was completely silent now. Even the servers had paused their activities. Different doesn't mean less than. My brain works differently than David's. I process information spatially and visually, rather than through textbooks and lectures. That doesn't make me less intelligent or less worthy of respect. To my surprise, Edward Bennett, David's boss, who had shown interest in my work earlier, spoke up. I can actually vouch for Ashley's talent. My sister hired her to redesign her dental practice last year and has been singing her praises ever since. Said patient anxiety complaints dropped dramatically with the new environment. I blinked in surprise. Dr. Margaret Bennett is your sister? Her project was one of my favorites. He nodded with a smile. She mentioned how you understood exactly what she needed without her having to explain it explicitly. Said you have an intuitive grasp of how environments affect emotional states. My parents looked utterly bewildered at this unexpected external validation from someone they respected. The point is, I continued with newfound confidence, there are many types of intelligence and many paths to success. Academic achievement is just one measure, and frankly, a narrow one. Emotional intelligence, creative problem solving, spatial reasoning, interpersonal skills, these are equally valuable forms of intelligence that our family has consistently dismissed. I looked at my brother. David, I'm genuinely proud of your accomplishments. But I'm also proud of mine, even if they don't come with formal ceremonies and fancy titles. To my parents, I said, I love you both, but your narrow definition of success and intelligence has caused real pain. I don't need your approval anymore, but I do need your respect, or at least the absence of active disrespect, at family gatherings. My father's face had turned an alarming shade of red. My mother looked like she'd swallowed something unpleasant. David stared at his plate. I'm not asking for apologies or declarations of pride in my accomplishments. I'm simply establishing a boundary. I won't participate in family events where my work and my path are treated as jokes or cautionary tales. I raised my champagne glass. So congratulations again, David. I wish you continued success. And I hope someday our family can broaden its definition of achievement enough to celebrate different kinds of intelligence with equal enthusiasm. I took a sip of champagne, set the glass down carefully, and picked up my clutch. The room remained in stunned silence as I walked over to David, gave him a brief hug, and whispered, I meant what I said about being proud of you. I just needed to be proud of me too. Then, with my head held high, I walked out of the private dining room, through the main restaurant, and into the cool Boston evening. For the first time in my life, I felt truly free of the weight of family expectation. Whatever came next, reconciliation or further estrangement, I had finally stood up for myself and my worth on my own terms. 1 week after the promotion party confrontation, I sat cross-legged on the floor of my studio, surrounded by fabric swatches and material samples for the Beacon Hill Boutique Hotel project. Zoe, my assistant, was organizing client files at the small desk in the corner, while soft jazz played in the background. The bell above the door chimed. I looked up, expecting the tile supplier, who was due to drop off samples, but instead saw David standing awkwardly in the entrance, holding a paper bag. "Wow," he said, looking around at the open, airy space with its large drafting tables and walls covered in design inspiration. "This is really professional." The surprise in his voice might have annoyed me before, but today I just found it mildly amusing. "That's generally the goal for a professional business," I replied, standing up to greet him. "What brings you to my little hobby shop?" He winced at the reference. "I deserve that. I brought peace offerings." He held up the bag. "Coffee and those almond croissants you used to like from Tat." "A compelling argument for reconciliation," I conceded, gesturing toward the small sitting area where I met with clients. "Zoe, can you give us a few minutes?" My assistant nodded and slipped out to run errands. David handed me a coffee and sat down, looking more uncertain than I'd ever seen him. My confident, Harvard-educated brother seemed genuinely uncomfortable. "I've never seen you stand up to the family like that," he finally said. It was long overdue. I took a sip of the perfectly made latte. He remembered how I liked it. "I came to apologize," he continued. "Not just for the party, but for everything. For not defending you all these years. For unconsciously buying into Mom and Dad's narrow vision of success. For treating your career like it was somehow less legitimate than mine." I studied him, looking for the condescension I'd grown accustomed to. Instead, I found what appeared to be genuine remorse. "What brought this on? Dad send you to smooth things over before the next family gathering?" "Actually, I haven't spoken to Dad since that night. Mom called once, but it was awkward." He fidgeted with his coffee cup. "The truth is, your speech made me realize some things about myself." "Like what?" "Like maybe I've been defining myself by their standards too." He looked up at me. "Do you know I hate about 60% of my job? The politics, the 100-hour weeks, the constant pressure to outperform everyone else." This was news to me. "But you've always seemed so satisfied with your career path." "Because it's what was expected. Thompson family success, prestigious degrees, impressive job title, six-figure salary." He shrugged. "Don't get me wrong, I'm good at what I do, but when I saw you stand up and defend your passion so fiercely, it made me wonder what I'm actually passionate about." "And?" I asked. "I have no idea," he admitted with a self-deprecating laugh. "That's kind of sad, isn't it? I'm 32, just made VP, and I don't know what I actually care about beyond meeting other people's expectations." For the first time, I saw my perfect brother clearly not as the golden child who had everything figured out, but as someone who had followed a prescribed path without questioning whether it was truly his own. "It's never too late to figure it out," I offered. "That's why I'm here, actually. I wanted to see your workspace, understand what you've built." He gestured around. "It's impressive, Ashley. You've created something meaningful entirely, on your own terms." The compliment felt genuine, without the usual backhanded quality I'd come to expect from family. "Thank you," I said simply. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Lunch next Tuesday? Just us." I showed the screen to David, who raised his eyebrows. "Are you going to go?" "I'm thinking about it," I replied honestly. "Not to seek approval or reconciliation on their terms, but maybe to establish a new dynamic, one where I'm not constantly seeking validation." "Bold," he commented. "Necessary," I corrected. As David was leaving, he paused at the door. "Your projects really are amazing, by the way. That restaurant design? Incredible spatial flow. Coming from a Harvard MBA. That means absolutely nothing," I teased. But there was no bite to it. He laughed. "Fair enough. Baby steps toward family redemption." After he left, I returned to my fabric samples with a lighter heart. For the first time, I'd glimpsed the possibility of a relationship with my brother based on mutual respect rather than comparison. 3 days later, Boston Design Week magazine arrived with my boutique hotel project featured on page 17, not the cover, but a legitimate mention with a sidebar about emerging talent reshaping Boston's design landscape. I texted a photo to Madison, who responded with appropriate levels of excitement and champagne emojis. To my surprise, my phone rang 10 minutes later. Aunt Rebecca. Ashley, I just saw your feature in Design Week. The hotel concept is quite striking. Coming from Aunt Rebecca, this was practically effusive praise. I waited for the inevitable qualification, the subtle dig that would reframe the compliment as criticism. Instead, she said, I'm renovating my home office and wondered if you might be available for a consultation. Your perspective on workspace functionality is evidently well informed. I nearly dropped my phone in shock. I'd be happy to look at your space, Aunt Rebecca. Excellent. And I may have been somewhat dismissive of your career choice in the past. That was short-sighted of me. It wasn't quite an apology, but from Aunt Rebecca, it was revolutionary. The following Tuesday, I met my mother for lunch at a small bistro halfway between her university office and my studio. We sat across from each other, awkward in a way we'd never been before, because for the first time, I wasn't trying to make myself smaller to earn her approval. Your father is still upset, she began after we ordered. I assumed he would be. He feels you disrespected him publicly. I met her gaze steadily, and I felt disrespected by him publicly and privately for most of my life. She fiddled with her napkin. We only wanted what was best for you. No, I contradicted gently. You wanted what you thought was best for me, based on your own narrow definition of success. Those aren't the same thing. My mother looked genuinely taken aback. The old Ashley would have immediately backpedaled, apologized, tried to smooth things over. The new Ashley waited patiently. Perhaps, she finally conceded, we were somewhat rigid in our expectations. It wasn't much, but it was something. I started a support group, I told her, changing the subject. For creative entrepreneurs without formal education, we meet monthly to share resources, connections, business advice. That's very community-minded of you. The world is full of talented people whose brains work differently than the academic model assumes. They deserve success too. She regarded me with what might have been newfound respect. You've become quite articulate in defending your position. I learned from professors, I replied with a small smile. Just not in a classroom. We didn't solve everything over lunch. Decades of family dynamics don't unravel in a single conversation. But we established a tentative new foundation, one where I wasn't seeking approval, but simply connection on equal terms. 2 months after David's promotion party, I stood in front of 20 aspiring designers at a local community center, giving a talk titled Alternative Paths to Creative Success. Many in the audience were young people who, like me, hadn't thrived in traditional educational settings, but possessed exceptional talents in visual and spatial domains. Success isn't a one-size-fits-all concept, I told them, showing slides of my project. The key is recognizing your unique strengths and building on them, rather than constantly trying to compensate for what society has labeled as weaknesses. As I spoke, I realized how far I'd come from that humiliated woman hiding in a restaurant bathroom. The journey hadn't been easy. Some family wounds would never fully heal. My father still struggled to acknowledge the legitimacy of my career, though he had grudgingly accepted my boundary setting. But the most important change wasn't in my family's perception of me, it was in my perception of myself. I no longer measured my worth against their yardstick. I had defined success on my own terms, and found freedom in that definition. The most valuable credential you can earn isn't framed and hung on a wall, I concluded to the attentive audience. It's the genuine satisfaction of building a life that honors your authentic talents and brings value to others. That's a success no one can ever take away from you. As the room filled with applause, I thought about how sometimes our deepest wounds become our greatest sources of wisdom when we have the courage to face them, heal them, and transform them into bridges that connect us to others walking similar paths. Have you ever been made to feel like you weren't enough because you didn't follow the traditional path? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more authentic stories about finding your own definition of success. Remember, different doesn't mean less, then sometimes it means exactly what the world needs. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you courage in honoring yours.